Elijah Harris arrived before dawn at Gate 3 of Fort Ridge Hope, an invitation in hand. The wind cut across the base at a crisp 48 enough to make breath visible, and steel hearts huddled deeper into collars. Elijah stood alone on the asphalt lane, his boots scuffing the painted yellow line that marked the restricted zone. The wool cap perched atop his silver hair read 5th Infantry Kassan, its faded white stitching the only banner he carried. Behind him, the pine trees creaked in empty cheer. Ahead, the chain-link fence stood silent, the barbed wire glinting under the weak morning light. Private Dawson snorted first voice, hushed but sharp enough to slice the quiet. Another lost grandpa from the retirement home. He stepped forward, fold of uniform, crisp against the chill. Corporal Briggs leaned in elbows, brushing the rifle slung over his shoulder. Elijah, the old man said, holding up the heavy letter stamped with the official seal. His fingers trembled as if the paper might dissolve in a single gust. I was invited. Dawson flicked his gaze to the sign, Veterans Day Legacy Ceremony. The words were printed in block letters nearly 2 inches tall, yet so small they could be missed by seasoned eyes. This is for honorees, Sir Dawson replied, tone polite but unyielding. Elijah's reply came on a soft exhale. I know. Briggs stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Senior Center's 3 miles that way, he said, pointing to a worn road sign. His smirk carried the weight of ignorance. Elijah did not flinch. He looked past them, past the gate to the wide drill field where he once trained new recruits under a blistering sun. He remembered dragging a wounded friend nearly 500 yards through mud and mortar. He remembered the sound of shells overhead, each blast a cruel metronome counting down lives. Slowly he retreated to the stone bench just beside the checkpoint, seating himself like a veteran rocking in old shoes. He placed the letter on his lap, folded neatly as if folding memories. The guard flag whipped overhead poles standing 30 feet tall, yet its salute felt mechanical hollow. Inside the preparation tent, the chatter had already begun. Soldiers in polished boots examined ribbons and pocket mirrors, laughter rising over the hum of portable heaters. Someone tossed out Legacy Day vibes, and 1,000 phones lit up with selfies, destined for a hashtag Nosharasha War is Cool. Private Mason Locke yanked off his cap, ear-to-ear grin, obvious even in the dim lantern light. Hope this wraps by noon. I've got tickets to the Bulldogs game, he muttered. A second lieutenant paced near the entrance, AirPods nestling in his ears. Clipboard in hand, he rehearsed the opening lines. We honor their sacrifice. We stand upon the shoulders of giants. He spotted Elijah and paused, eyes flicking to the gate. Sir, this area is closed for ceremony setup, he called out, voice clipped, but not unkind. Elijah raised the letter again, veins standing out on his hands like soldiers' cords. The lieutenant read it twice, preferring. Invitation. Sergeant Major Elijah C. Harris. Honored speaker. He looked up, expression uncertain. There must be a mistake, he said. We weren't informed you'd be arriving alone or this early. Elijah did not argue. He slid the letter back into his coat, adjusting the collar, as if measuring his worth by the weight of fabric. This place remembers me better than your clipboard does. The lieutenant hesitated, then motioned toward the visitor center, 300 yards down the road. It'll be warmer there, he offered. Inside the sterile waiting room log sheet behind the desk and muted TV flashing headline news, Elijah folded his arms. Nothing moved on the screen except the ticker at the bottom tallying market stocks and celebrity gossip. A vending machine hummed insistently, walls echoing his solitude. Moments stretched into minutes. Private Locke reappeared, clipboard in hand, eyes darting between the old man and the door. Sir, you can't wait here, he said, posture stiff. This space is for designated media and families. Elijah's gaze drifted to the dog tag hanging against his chest. Benton dulled, it read, Elijah C. Harris, SGM, oppose USA Catholic. He opened his mouth, but words weighed too much. Instead, he simply rose and walked back outside. The chill had deepened. The flag moved slower as though sensing the tension. Briggs nudged him aside to reopen the gate. Their shoulders brushed the only contact before Elijah returned to the bench. He sat again, hands folded in his lap. The letter lay untouched, no ink rubbed away, but memory had already stained it. Somewhere beyond the fence, the bugle would soon sound reveille, and officers in starched uniforms would rise. A single breath passed between those standing inside the perimeter, a breath Elijah carried twice over in and out of a place that once felt like home. Above him, the oak leaves whispered, "Loss is only the beginning," and Elijah listened, waiting for someone to ask the first question he would never need to answer. As the sun edged higher, the base stirred to life, and Elijah remained on that stone bench, the first of many silences yet to come. Elijah had been barred at the gate and now sat alone on the cold stone bench, invitation untouched and the morning light growing sharper. The visitor center waiting room was poorly heated, the thermostat stuck at a drafty 55 degree. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, buzzing like restless cicadas in a Georgia summer. Elijah's dog tag pressed against his chest, bent letters catching the weak glow, reminded him that he belonged here more than any paperwork could prove. Outside wind rattled the window frames. Inside, only the soft click of vending machine gears broke the silence. He shifted on the vinyl chair, wool coat creaking. A digital clock on the wall ticked to 7:42 a.m. The receptionist 90 yards away behind a thick plexiglass window didn't glance up. Her computer screen displayed spreadsheets and supply orders, not the names of those who built this place. Elijah exhaled slowly, the air escaping in a perfect plume. He watched dissipate into nothing. In the prep tent, Private Locke's viral clip was already making the rounds. On his phone screen, Locke's smirk and the caption, "Grandpa beats our checklist." Gerard's legacy fail scrolled under hundreds of likes and mocking comments. One comment read, "Bro, did he bring his walker too?" Another wished my grandma had that jacket. Locke replayed it, chuckling to himself as he queued up another post. When your invite gets lost, but you still roll up Punish veteran vibes. Elijah had never asked for pity yet. Here he was, patted by laughter he could almost hear. The message echoed in his mind louder than the gunfire at Kesson Ridge. "Not on the list, you're not one of us." He forced his gaze upward to the wall-mounted TV, where a muted news anchor discussed the morning commute around Savannah, Georgia. The base's name never came up. This was small potatoes in a big world. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back on the drill field. The scent of cordite, the rhythmic thud of boots on hardpan, the creak of his pack under a tropical sun. Then the whistle blew, and everything snapped back. Elijah pulled his coat tighter, brushing dust from the bench where he'd sat before. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving damp spots on the stone. Moisture seeped through his trousers. The letter in his lap felt like a betrayal, its crisp edges now softened by his grip. He thought of his daughter living in Charleston who'd promised to drive him here. She'd been delayed. He had mailed an RSVP 4 weeks ago. Phone calls went unanswered. Now even the invitation felt like a trial. A sudden ping from his pocket drew his attention. A push notification? Trending, Jarn Legacy Day fail. He clicked, and a photo of him, slouching on the bench, head bowed, filled the screen. The caption, "Man in old coat thinks he's VIP, Sarsher Gate 3 gatekeeper." Comments swarmed, "So sad, LOL, can't make this up." Elijah's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened around the folded letter. A door swung open behind him. Second Lieutenant Baird stepped in crisp uniform, sharp against the dingy walls. "Sergeant Major Harris," he said quietly. "They're ready for you in the logistics tent." Elijah's heart flickered, hope, disappointment. He didn't know which. He rose each movement, deliberate coat, brushing the cold linoleum. Before he turned, he caught his reflection in the glass silver hair, framing a face carved by years of humidity and combat. The dog tag glinted. He touched it gently, as if reminding himself it was more than a prop. Baird cleared his throat. I apologize for the confusion. They value your service. Elijah nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and followed without a word. The dog tag swung against his chest, a silent cadence, leading him away from isolation and toward a ceremony that still might remember why he came. As he passed the visitor center windows, he paused, looking back at the empty bench. A single leaf caught in a puddle drifted away. He didn't reach for it. He carried too many leaves of memory already. Elijah followed the gravel path away from the visitor center, the echo of his boots crunching like distant gunfire, and stepped into the wide clearing where the Legacy Day ceremony was underway. The morning sun hovered near 10:15 a.m., climbing toward 68-2, and the field was alive with the rustle of folding chairs and the low murmur of officers in dress blues. He paused at the edge of the perimeter tent, straightened his shoulders, and let the weight of every step remind him why he came. A bugle call shattered the chatter, three clear notes of "To the Colors" that hung in the air like a challenge. The crowd snapped to attention. Somewhere behind him, a pine branch tapped against the tent frame, a soft percussion underscoring the moment. Elijah's heart tightened. He brushed a strand of gray hair behind his ear and moved forward, tracing the line of soldiers toward the flagpole. General Emory Parks stood at the podium, starched coat immaculately pressed, four silver stars gleaming on his collar. The Medal of Honor ribbon on his chest caught the light. A crowd of cameras fanned out like obedient soldiers at his feet. He scanned the crowd with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, then paused, head tilting slightly, just enough to single out the old sergeant standing alone at the tent's fringe. The hush that followed was sudden and deep, the kind of silence that snaps conversations in half. A single leaf skittered across the asphalt behind Elijah, as if even nature were holding its breath. General Parks spoke into the microphone, his voice low but caring. "I see many of you here today, family members, media cadets. But I notice one man who belongs not because of ceremony, but because of service." A ripple moved through the chairs. Private Briggs, who'd shoved Elijah aside that morning, straightened so abruptly his spine sounded like a door snapping shut. Private Lock Clipboard, now tucked under his arm, swallowed hard gaze, flicking to the dog tag resting against Elijah's chest. The banner above the stage, "Legacy is lived, not just remembered," fluttered in a light breeze emblematic of the moment. General Parks stepped down from the podium, each footfall deliberate on the wooden platform. The band fell, mute drumsticks lowered. Only the distant hum of bass traffic reminded listeners the world continued beyond this field. Parks walked toward Elijah, every step compressing decades of history into the space between them. When they stood face to face, General Parks removed his cap and saluted. The snap of his salute echoed across the asphalt, sharp enough to startle. Old sergeants and new recruits alike mirrored the gesture in perfect unison. Then he spoke, still saluting. "Welcome home, Sergeant Major Harris." Elijah's eyes glistened. He stood at attention, the old coat fitting oddly against his frame, yet feeling right for the first time all morning. He returned the salute, hands trembling slightly. In that shared moment, rank and age dissolved. Only mutual respect remained. The crowd exhaled as one. Officer cadets fresh from Annapolis and West Point lowered their caps. Veteran retirees stiffened in folding chairs. Even the local news crews lowered their cameras as though afraid to intrude on something sacred. Somewhere in the back, a child whispered, "Isn't that the man from the news?" General Parks placed a gentle hand on Elijah's shoulder and guided him back to the podium. Papers shifted in the wind as they climbed the steps, and the microphone cable sighed a soft protest. When Elijah settled behind the lectern, he looked down at the wood grain, recalling the floors of the old barracks at Fort Benning, where he once trained recruits at 3 a.m., boots muddy with Georgia clay. He cleared his throat, an honest sound, rough as gravel, but said nothing at first. The world waited beyond the tent flaps, the white tents of the logistics area, the 30-foot flagpole, where he'd stood guard at dawn, the wooden bench by Gate 3, now empty but still resonant in memory. When he spoke, his voice was gravel, softened by age. "I've walked through these gates before they were sealed with pavement. I've slept under tarps that later became classrooms. I've carried brothers 5 miles through mud so deep your knees never break the surface twice without giving in. I've buried men whose names the world forgot long before they left this earth. A hush deeper than before fell so profound that someone in the center row gasped, and the sound felt loud enough to crack the tension. Elijah paused, letting the weight of every word settle into every uniformed chest. "But I don't stand here for your pity," he continued, gaze sweeping the crowd. "I stand here because silence does not equal absence, and dignity does not ask for permission to be recognized." A breeze picked up, flapping the American flag overhead like an exclamation point. Cameras clicked not out of spectacle, but out of reverence. The powdered blues of airman dress uniforms, the forest greens of army fatigues, the sandy tans of Marine coveralls all converged in a mosaic of respect. Elijah let the silence return, holding the moment like a breath. Then he stepped back from the microphone and turned away as if refusing applause. General Parks nodded and recapped his head, offering Elijah's place at his side instead of back on the bench where he'd begun the day. As they descended the stage steps together, a murmur rose, first tentative, then swelling into genuine applause. Not the hollow clatter of polite hand-slapping, but the measured, heartfelt tribute of people finally seeing what they almost overlooked. In the back, Sergeant Liza Moore's shoulders shook as she wiped a tear. Even Private Briggs dabbed at his eyes with the corner of his sleeve. Elijah didn't look at them. He only glanced at the flagpole, then to the empty bench by Gate 3. He knew a ceremony could end, but remembrance was a longer road. He nodded once to General Parks, whose eyes shone with pride and unspoken gratitude, and stepped off the grass toward the tent's exit. The applause followed him, softer now, like footsteps echoing down a long corridor. He passed rows of saluting soldiers and curious onlookers, each taking their own piece of the moment home. The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with the tang of hot coffee from nearby concession stands. Somewhere the trumpet of taps began to fade in the distance, a reminder of battles lost and lives honored. Elijah reached the tent flap and stopped, hand on the canvas. He looked back once more at the stage, now empty save for a lone cap and a stray ribbon fluttering in the breeze. He stepped out into the sunlight, shoulders, squared dog tag glinting at the center of his chest. He walked without hurry toward the brick-lined walkway that led back to Gate 3, where a different task awaited. The ceremony had honored him, but the legacy he carried was not confined to a single morning. It stretched beyond the tent, across the field, and into every shadowed corner of Fort Ridge, where remembrance had to be lived every day. As he passed the oak trees lining the road, their leaves rustling in a quieter hush, he whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." And with that, he turned a corner and disappeared from view, leaving behind a field of salutes and a promise that true honor never ends. After a powerful public salute, Elijah Harris stepped off the stage at Fort Ridge, with applause trailing behind him, honored at last by the flag he'd defended. The afternoon sun hovered around 75ers Gloucester as Elijah left the logistics tent and headed toward the officers' club. His footsteps echoed on the brick pathway, crisp against the scent of freshly mown grass. Rows of folding chairs were already being stacked, and the banner proclaiming, "Legacy is lived, not just remembered," fluttered gently as soldiers rolled it up. Elijah adjusted his coat collar, buttoned now to his throat, and let the cool breeze sweep away the day's formality, preparing him for what came next. Inside Building 7, Room 204, a dozen cadets and junior officers sat in stiff-backed chairs under fluorescent lights. A single wooden table held a photograph of a younger Elijah in combat fatigues, surrounded by sandbags and barbed wire. General Emory Parks entered carrying a wax-sealed envelope and closed the door behind him. The room fell silent, as if the walls themselves had learned to listen. "Thank you for your attention," General Parks began, voice steady and low. "Today you saw a ceremony. Tomorrow you'll live the lessons you witnessed." He drew a deep breath and set the envelope on the table. Inside are 8 names. He continued sliding photographs across the woodmen who served alongside Elijah in Firebase Kassan, all buried before reaching 50. Each of you will be paired with a veteran from our new legacy division. Privates Locke and Briggs exchanged uneasy glances. Locke's forehead creased. Briggs leaned forward, hands clasped. The general's words hung in the air. Live with them. Learn their stories, share in their days until the month's end. No daily briefings, no set schedules, only listening and bearing witness. Elijah arrived moments later, escorted by Sergeant Liza Moore. He carried nothing but his dog tag and a calm resolve. Parks introduced him. Sergeant Major Harris will be your guide in understanding what true legacy demands. The veterans and the soldiers saluted him, then sat at his invitation round the table. Over the next 4 weeks, the boundaries between ranks blurred. Briggs found himself hand-tilling a garden plot with Mr. Fletcher, a 92-year-old Marine Corps vet who'd served at Iwo Jima. Each turn of the soil revealed stories of foxholes and brotherhood. Locke accompanied Mrs. Ramirez, an Army nurse, who treated incoming casualties in Vietnam, rising at dawn to help her prepare chessboards for a group of assisted living residents. They ate breakfast at precisely 6:30 a.m., the steam from coffee swirling in the kitchen as Mrs. Ramirez recalled the hum of helicopters overhead and the fragility of hope. Every evening, Elijah convened the group in the old community hall on base, a simple room with oak pews, salvaged from an Airstream orphan years before. He guided them through reflections, what they saw, what they felt, what they failed to notice at the gate that first morning. Silence became a tool sharper than any blade, forcing them to confront indifference in their own hearts. Meanwhile, outside Gate 3, a small bronze plaque had been installed on the stone bench where Elijah first waited. Its inscription read, "For those who carried others when no one watched." No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press release, just a quiet nod to service unseen. Each dawn, a guard polished the plaque by hand, shoulders squared before sunrise, as he read the words aloud. The gate itself, once locked against Elijah, now stood ajar, a silent invitation for any veteran to pass freely without clearance or escort. On the final day of the program, the soldiers gathered at dawn by that very bench. Elijah arrived, coat unbuttoned, now the morning air, at a crisp 60 degrees F, rustling the pages of their journals. He didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at each face, youthful, uncertain, transformed, and nodded. Then he said, voice steady but soft, "Legacy isn't a ceremony you attend once a year. It's the way you open a gate for the next person who needs to come home." The soldiers stood in reflective silence. Briggs reached forward, touched the plaque gently, and offered a salute without a word. Locke closed his notebook and lowered his hand, eyes bright with understanding. They turned to Elijah, expecting instructions, but he simply pointed toward the empty bench. "Sit," he said, "and listen." They sat, shoulders squared, not because of orders, but out of respect earned through shared morning stories and silences. The plaque caught the rising sun, its engraving glowing with renewed purpose. Elijah stepped back into the shade of the oak trees lining the access road. Behind him, the gate remained open, and the bench waited, ready for anyone whose story needed to be heard. As the first guard of the new rotation approached, Elijah faded down the path, leaving behind the echo of footsteps and a legacy that would outlast any ceremony. Hoy ChatGPT.